Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. There is a strong connection between environmental toxicants and the development of type 2 diabetes. However, our environment is just one of the many reasons that why someone would develop diabetes. We must take a holistic approach and control as many factors as possible to help prevent the development of diabetes and improve some of the symptoms if we experience from it. Diabetes actually starts with insulin resistance, and around 38% of the people worldwide actually have insulin resistance. People with insulin resistance, also known as impaired insulin sensitivity, have built up resistance to insulin, making the hormone less effective. As a result, then they are at a greater risk of developing diabetes. That's why today we're really excited to be chatting with insulin expert Shana Hussin. Shana is an integrative dietitian, online course creator, and podcast host that specializes in obesity, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, and fatty liver disease. During this live, we're going to discuss signs of insulin resistance, foods to eat and avoid, including some surprising ones, as well as other ways to prevent type 2 diabetes. So I saw Shauna. Here you are. Hi, Shauna.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your background, like how you became an insulin expert.
Yeah, it's kind of a journey, but I've been conventionally trained in the dietetics profession for 23 years, and for a lot of that time, I gave guidelines to my patients and clients and students that didn't work all that well. So about 10 to 15 years in, I started to develop some of my own health issues despite following all of the traditional guidelines. And I thought, if it's this hard for me as a nutrition expert, it's got to be so hard for other people. So about that same time, one of my children, my middle son, got very ill, and I just started going down all of these really deep dives and rabbit holes into anything that could have been triggering his illness. And I did a lot of research into whole natural nutrition and just discovered that what I was teaching may not have been the best solution for a lot of people. Unfortunately, I wish I could go back in time and teach them all the concepts that I know now. But I also started to do a lot of research into insulin and insulin resistance and what causes that. And I started to do some intermittent fasting on my own. I thought it was the craziest thing at first. I'm like, there is no way that this is healthy for people. And for me to even go till 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning was a big stretch, because I was insulin resistant myself, and I was needing to eat all the time. Even though I was eating healthy food, I was needing to eat all of the time to feel good. So I just started to research all of these things and started to implement some intermittent fasting, and I started to cut some of my carbohydrate intake. And I felt enormously better within a few months. And some chronic health issues that I had, like bloating, I had canker sores in my mouth, and I never had a big weight issue, but it was really hard for me to manage my weight. Like, I was working really hard to stay at a healthy weight, and I thought it shouldn't be this hard. All of those things just started to resolve themselves. And a few years in, I started to learn the metabolic testing for it, and I started to treat my students with nutrition therapy that was really centered around insulin resistance and the treatment of it. And it's just astounding how well they do. It's kind of almost the opposite of what I used to teach, which is kind of sad. But it's just the truth. And now they do so well. And I get, I post a lot of their messages. I screenshot them and I post them on my stories, because they're just doing so well. And just really, really simple strategies make a huge difference in their life. And like, I have courses that that teach people just little by little how to implement a low insulin lifestyle is what I like to call it. And over time, I mean, it takes time to resolve. It took me years to resolve my insulin resistance fully. But it will happen, and you'll just feel so much better, and you feel like a human should feel when you're metabolically flexible and you're digesting food well and you're using all the energy that you should be using. It takes some time, but it's so worth it in the end.
That is amazing. Is that where you also call yourself an integrative dietitian? This is like where all the integrative part comes in.
Yeah, the more conventional dietitians really just if you're practicing in the conventional system, you just really have to stick with their guidelines and what they tell you to teach. And you can't really deviate from that because that's the medical nutrition therapy that you need to teach in the conventional system. Whereas integrative, like I left the conventional system years ago, and integrative is more of a holistic look, and really it's still medical nutrition therapy, but really just looking at what is causing this illness for this particular person and how can we treat it to resolve it. Whereas when I was in the conventional system, it was more like people were labeled with their diagnoses, and then you went to your little file of of handouts, and this person has high blood pressure. Oh, these are the recommendations for people with high blood pressure, and you'd go through it, and you'd go through every single person with high blood pressure in the same way. And I just thought there's got to be a better solution and a better approach, because not everybody's the same. Like what I tolerate well and I works well for me nutritionally probably won't work well for you. Like my day-to-day, maybe it would, but not everybody. So to generalize everybody, I didn't love that. So I went and did, now I do more of the looking at that particular person and what's going to be helpful for them.
I love it. I love it. Now today we're talking about insulin. So what is insulin like? What's its purpose and how does it work?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't want people to think that insulin's bad. Like, insulin's a hormone that basically directs energy into your cell. Like when you eat food, it goes into your bloodstream, but it doesn't just get into your cell on its own. It's got to have a hormone that tells it where to go, what to do. If you're going to burn that now, if you're going to store it, what are you going to do with that energy? And that hormone is insulin. There's other hormones too, but that's the main one. And insulin is an energy storage hormone. So we need it. If we didn't have it, we would die. Like type 1 diabetics don't produce insulin, so they have to take it exogenously and inject it. So I don't want people to get the impression that you don't need insulin or that it's bad. It's when the problem comes is when we have too much circulating insulin. And what happens is all of our cells have insulin receptors, and over time, our cells basically just become immune to that insulin hormone when it's high all the time. It's like, oh gosh, this hormone has just been sitting here telling me to store energy forever, like over and over. So the cells just don't really utilize energy very efficiently when you have insulin resistance. And over time, those high levels just can be problematic. This is how fatty liver develops. This is how diabetes and type 2 diabetes, like people are told that prediabetes and type 2 diabetes and almost all fatty liver, even blood pressure issues are a result of insulin resistance. They're just told, oh, you have these diseases. They're progressive. Sorry, like manage it, go and exercise and lose weight. And then people are like, okay, I've been trying that for 30, 40, 50 years. That's not helping me. I exercise. I've been trying to lose weight. But when you're insulin resistant, you're so weight loss resistant that if you don't fix those insulin levels, it's just like you're going round and round in this circle and not really solving anything. And it's so frustrating for people because they're doing all the right things. They're moving more and eating less, and they're still not seeing the results. So insulin is basically the hormone that directs the energy where it needs to go. But very high levels over the time cause insulin resistance. And then our cells just don't respond and we don't utilize energy well. So that's the bottom line. It's like you can eat and you're hungry, you eat, but the energy's not getting into the cell. You're storing it. So you can be very overweight and a lot of extra body fat, but still just hungry all the time because that insulin level is really high. And that is where the frustration is, where a lot of the students that I work with.
I also think like some of the traditional guidelines in terms of like the level of insulin resistance could also be problematic because some people, okay, traditionally their A1C or other markers are normal, but they still have the symptom. They have experienced high blood pressures and all these things, trying to lose weight, not actually losing weight, but not actually looking to exactly their own like insulin resistance or insulin tolerance.
I see that all the time. People write into me and they're like, do I have insulin resistance? My blood sugar is normal and my A1C is normal. So common. I see it all, like every week I get that message, like my A1C is normal. How do I have insulin resistance? So high levels of insulin can start years to decades before you have a blood sugar or hemoglobin A1C problem. If you're to the point of prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, you've been insulin resistant for probably 10 years or more. Because what the body does is, insulin resistance basically develops because we're eating too often. We're eating the types of food, like a lot of carbohydrate, a lot of ultra processed foods that really increase and provoke high insulin secretion. We're eating that so often that we are having high blood sugars a lot. It's just we don't know it because our pancreas will respond and push out so much insulin to get those blood sugars back down. It's like you go and get a fasting insulin, it's normal. Or I'm sorry, fasting glucose, it's normal. Get an A1C, it's normal. It's looking like the blood work is normal, but your insulin is high because you're always secreting, you're pumping out that insulin to try to deal with those blood sugars. So this can go on. I mean, sometimes it's decades before you show up. And by the time you've gotten to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, you are very metabolically ill. But it can be reversed, which is the good thing.
Yeah. So what are some signs that people should look out for insulin resistance?
Yeah, there's a lot of physical signs that you can look for. And in my case, I was just kind of having the starting signs of insulin resistance. For me, I was having to eat every 2, 3, 4 hours at the most. Like if you're feeling like you eat a meal and you're still hungry or you're still having sugar cravings or you get really tired after your meals, those are telltale signs of insulin resistance because your body's just not doing what it needs to with that fuel. And then again, if you're getting hungry a lot, insulin is high, most likely because it stimulates hunger. So those are some things to look for. High blood pressure, as we discussed, high blood sugars, obviously those are insulin resistant signs. High blood pressure, some things that skin issues tend to be one that are really common with insulin resistance. Skin tags are a direct cause of insulin resistance. So if you have a lot of skin tags, like those little kind of brown, little kind of flecks of skin, almost not moles, but skin tags that are also actually raised up off the skin, that's a sign. Dark patches around the neck, armpits, elbows, that's a telltale sign of blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. A lot of abdominal fat, belly fat, that's another sign because you probably have a fatty liver by that point. Your body is like not knowing what to do with all of this extra fat that is basically sugar converted to fat because you can't utilize the energy, stuffs it in the liver, stuffs it in the organs, and you just get the central obesity problem. That's another telltale sign. And then weight loss resistance and inability to lose weight is a huge one. And like sleeping issues can be traced back to insulin resistance. I mean, probably almost everyone listening to this has some of her signs. But yeah, and just having to eat and not feeling full ever, that's another sign. And yeah, for me, it was like I didn't gain weight, but it was just really hard for me to maintain my weight. And I was one of those people, like I woke up and I ate like at 5 or 6 in the morning before I went to work out, thinking I had to have something to fuel me. And I ate until, not always after dinner, but sometimes I'd have a snack before bed or whatever it was. But I was just eating all day, and I was eating healthy food, but I was eating too often, and that was driving. And I have a very strong association of type 2 diabetes in my family as well. So the genetic predisposition is there. So yeah, it's very, very common of American adults, about 80% have some level of insulin resistance, which is crazy. And like 93% are not metabolically healthy and all the metabolic parameters. So it's only 7% of American adults are completely metabolically flexible and utilize their energy well and have no signs of metabolic illness. So it's a staggering issue. The statistics are staggering.
What are some causes then for this insulin resistance?
Yeah, the causes are mainly nutrition related. I mean, it's almost always traced back to nutrition. Like I said, there's a genetic predisposition, and the stronger that is, the more likely you are to develop insulin resistance. But just because you have the genetic predisposition doesn't mean you will. Like, I'm a good example of that. Like, I was insulin resistant. I definitely have the genetic predisposition, but now I'm not. And like both of my sisters, my mom and my dad, a lot of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, all type 2 diabetic, all very metabolically ill. But some of the causes are basically our standard American diet and our lifestyle. I mean, it's just if you follow the standard American diet, you're most likely going to develop insulin resistance. So if you're eating very often from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed, even if you're eating healthy foods, every time you're eating, you're stimulating an insulin response, unless you're eating fat. Fat doesn't really cause an insulin response, but carbohydrates are the biggest stimulators of insulin, and even healthy carbs like fruits or smoothies or whole grains. So they're still big stimulators of insulin. And then protein will stimulate it to some extent as well. Fat, not really. But, even if you're eating really healthfully, but you're eating 5, 6, 7, 8, I think the latest study shows that people eat between 13 and 21 times a day. Like, not a full-fledged meal, but just like sipping on a sugary coffee, grabbing a handful of almonds, eating a stick of string cheese. Like, it's healthy stuff, but they're still putting something in their mouth with calories 13 times a day. So your insulin's just high all day because you're just stimulating it all the time. And then, of course, ultra processed foods are very big stimulators of insulin resistant. Sugary drinks, even even if it's 100% organic fruit juice, it's still going to be a big stimulator of insulin. And then our sedentary lifestyle just doesn't help either, because, if you can get more movement and more exercise, even walking after meals, you're going to decrease that blood sugar. You're going to have a decrease in insulin response, but not a lot of people do that. We're just sitting all day, and then compounded, you don't sleep well. Yeah. That makes you more insulin resistance. Stress increases. Those are cortisol issues. So it's just, you take a look at the standard American, and it's no wonder we have insulin resistance. I mean, it's our lifestyle. And, I'm 47 years old. So I was born into the low fat, don't eat fat, eat lots of carbs, eat lots of grains, eat fat-free everything. And it was just a recipe for disaster. Even though I've always been very active, we've just been misled, and it's people are insulin resistant, but it's not their fault. They're just trying to follow the guidelines and do what they think is healthiest. And unfortunately, it's usually not the case.
So now, what are some protocol you would recommend to help people with insulin resistance?
Yeah, I have lots of different courses that I have, like a jumpstart that's 10 days, where just like, if you're really new, you're like, what the heck is insulin resistance? I don't know what she's even talking about. I have like a 10-day course that's just one habit for one day. And you just I talk you through why we do that habit. And then I have like a starter course that is just 3 recorded lessons to help you get started on the path to reversing insulin resistance. And then I have a big course that is called Low Insulin Academy. And that teaches you everything you need to know to reverse insulin resistance, testing, any targeted supplements, how to keep that disease state in remission. It covers nutrition, it covers stress, it covers, like, that is the McDaddy of all my courses. But in those courses, the main strategies that I teach, the most potent strategies, the 2 most potent strategies, and there's others. Well, I teach 3 things, but intermittent fasting and fasting protocols. And a lot of times people are like, I don't want to be, I don't want fasting. And, it's not like you have to go and do 3-day fasts every week. Just learning how to fast more than being in a fasted state more than you're in a fed state, so that your body can get a break, take a break from insulin. It's like we're just bombarding it from the time we get up till we go to bed. And it's a lot of work for your body to digest food and having to constantly produce enzymes and figure out what to do with all that food. So even like 12 or 14 hours of gut rest a day can be super beneficial. So that's one strategy. And everybody's different with fasting. And that's what I help you inside my courses. People are like, well, do I have, where do I start? And we look at, where you're at, what are your goals, what's your health history? I need to know those 3 things before I can really set you up with a protocol. And then the second strategy is therapeutic carb restriction. And I like people to think of these as therapies, because that's what they are. These are therapies that reverse insulin resistance. It's not like we're just trying to starve ourselves or be on this weird diet. It's like these therapies that actually bring insulin down so you can reverse insulin resistance. So therapeutic carb restriction is the second one. And that's basically just finding your carb level that's going to allow you to heal. And carbohydrates in and of themselves are not demonic. It's not like I teach no carb, but I do teach low carb, because we've just gotten ourselves into a huge mess by eating. The standard American eats 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate a day. That's what we've been taught. We've been taught to eat 6 servings of grains and 5 to 8 servings of fruits and vegetables and, dairy and all of those things are carbohydrate based. Whereas if we can keep those more moderate. So I teach people anywhere from 25 to 100 grams of carbohydrate. It really kind of just depends on your disease process and what you're trying to achieve. People do very well with that. And it's not like if I start somebody at 25 to 50 grams of carbohydrate because they're type 2 diabetic and they're very ill, they're going to have to stay there for a time as their body heals and as you get more insulin sensitive. But, sometime down the road, you're able to increase that and your body just gets more sensitive to carbohydrates and can handle a little more. But with that being said, I don't think there's many people that need to go above 100 grams of carbohydrate a day either. I mean, you can look at the population I work with. No, there are some really extreme athletes, or you're competing, or you're a 3-sport athlete in high school. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about those who are metabolically ill, and the vast majority of Americans who are sitting a lot of the day and just don't need to eat more than 100 grams of carbohydrate. So we kind of talk through that in the courses too, and I help you figure out where to start with carbohydrates. And again, they're not evil. And I teach non-starchy, high fiber vegetables and a couple servings of fruit, and getting away from so many grains, because even if they're whole grains, we just don't need to eat a lot of those. For especially if you're metabolically ill. And then there is a third strategy that I teach, is just the proper meal order to eat your food so that you have the best blood sugar response. It is huge. And these are little things that over time just add up and are huge. So those are the strategies that I teach. It's not anything weird diets, packaged foods, having to exercise 2 hours a day. And And the really beautiful thing about what I teach in the strategies are they're sustainable. You can do them with your family. You can teach these things to your kids. Obviously, you're not going to have your kids fasting, but they can learn. They can learn like, what order to eat their food in so that they feel better. They can learn, proper macronutrient profiling and that sort of thing. And they can learn to not eat 8, 10, 15 times a day and get out of the whole snacking mode and get back into the meal mode. Back before the 70s when families only ate meals and they didn't have such, like I tell my kids all the time, I never took a snack to school in my life, ever. Like nobody had snacks when I was a kid. Nobody took water. I mean, I'm not saying water bottles aren't healthy, but we didn't take water bottles. We didn't take snacks. Like you had your lunch, you maybe had a milk time or something, like there was no snacks. There may be a birthday treat here and there, but that was it. So those are the strategies that really move the needle with reversing insulin resistance.
I love it. I love it. It's also the courses are at different levels. People can entry, and then also you have broken down to bits and pieces. So it's really easy for people to digest and then make it really actionable, and they can work with their entire family and really changing the insulin resistance for the entire family, which is so awesome.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of kids who are insulin resistant, some babies are even born insulin resistant, just higher than normal levels of insulin because the mother had very high insulin levels. So, that from the very get-go of their life, they're just, put into this hormonal spot where it's going to be really hard for them to control their weight and to utilize food well. So yeah, these concepts are not anything crazy. And that's been on my agenda for a couple of years to come up with, like most of my courses are geared toward adults. And then they can, kind of implement them with their families, but one that's geared toward the whole family and, how to go about this with kids and how to, because that's a delicate dance, It's like I have 3 teenagers, and you don't want to you don't want to overdo things to the point where they're like, oh, should I
resistant?
Mom's around, like, oh, crazy Nazi mom. But you do want them to know how food's going to affect them and how it's going to make them feel. And even if they don't always make the choice that's going to make them feel the best, at least they know in their head. Like that's always my goal. And whether or not they follow through, I don't know, but at least they have the knowledge there.
We'll be looking out for that whole family guide. This will be amazing.
Yeah, I hope that it's out sooner than later. Like I just have the outline at this stage, but it's in the works at least.
That's awesome. What's your ideal insulin resistant friendly meal? Like, what would be your go-to recipe for a guest?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like a recipe per se, but I always I educate my students, like keep things as simple as possible. Like you don't need to go and do all of these weird extravagant meals, and you definitely don't need to make more than one meal for your family. And so a lot of people ask, like, do you give like meal plans? And I don't actually give meal plans. Of course, in my courses, I have, like grocery lists and sample meals and that sort of thing. But I don't give like meal plans, because I could give a 2-week meal plan to 10 people and maybe 2 people would be able to follow through with that. Or, they'd have sensitivities or whatever it was. But I do give people targets over the course of the day. And that makes it really simple. Like for women, the first thing I have them do is to just try to hit their protein targets of 100 grams of protein a day. And for a lot of women, that's very challenging because they're only eating 20, 30, 40 grams of protein a day. And that's just not enough, especially as we age. We actually need more protein as we age. People aren't aware of that. They think they need less. But we don't utilize it as well, and we get lower stomach acids, so we just don't digest it well, and we really need that protein to preserve our muscle mass and for satiety. So I always have women target 100 grams of protein a day as a starting reference, kind of general reference point. And then, really key in on those carbohydrates, somewhere between 25 and 100 grams. So most people are going to be, 50 grams of protein in the meal and under 50 grams of carbohydrate in the meal. But yeah, I just have them, pick a non-starchy vegetable or two, or, non-starchy vegetables and a protein source or two, and then some fatty acids. And, you can mix and match however you want to do. But like one of my go-to meals would be like 3 eggs and so like a cup of cottage cheese with some berries. And then I might have like a keto bread of some sort here or there. So nothing complicated, but if I eat that meal, I'm full for 5 to 6 hours usually. And I don't think about food because my hormones are regulated. I'm not getting blood sugar swings. That's a huge thing. Your blood sugar stays nice and level, so you're not getting those blood sugar swings that make you hungry. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe I should make dinner for my family. It's getting to be that time. I don't need to snack. And that wasn't always, I will tell you, I was not always like this. I was the one that was taking snacks everywhere. I was, if I'd even start to get hungry, I'd get concerned, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting hungry. And I think I had some hypoglycemia going on too. Yeah.
Well, the encouraging thing is it's all reversible if people are willing to follow protocols and learn about this topic and then taking actions.
Yes. Yes, it is. And I have a master class that goes through the testing for insulin resistance so that you can see physically where you're at. So there's 3 markers I usually have people request from their provider, or if you work with me inside my courses, I do have home kit options where you can order home kits. But the tests are fasting glucose, fasting insulin, which most people have never had, and then hemoglobin A1C. And most people have had a fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C, especially if they have blood sugar issues, but fasting insulin is not something that's regularly checked. It's becoming more common. It's not expensive. It's like $5 to $20 usually. And it's just a blood test that you can run with your other tests. But fasting glucose and fasting insulin can be calculated into an equation called the HOMA-IR test, where you can actually see your severity of insulin resistance. And I go through all of this in my master class, and I go through examples of what to look for. I go through my personal lab history. And then from there, you can track it. Like every 3 to 6 months, you can see, okay, my blood sugars have always been normal, but look at my fasting insulin that's slowly coming down over time. And that one takes a while to move. It can be 10, 20, 30, 40 years that it's been elevated. So it takes some time for that to come down.
Oh, wow. Wow. Your wealth of knowledge. This is amazing. I know we're a little bit over time, but I still want to have one more question because I want you to talk about your podcast, Fast to Heal Stories. So like, what kind of topic do you cover? Where can people find it?
Yeah. When did they podcast? It came on I think it was 2020. Was it 2020 or 2021? I can't remember. I've released 131 episodes now. So it's called Fast to Heal Stories. And I started out by just like interviewing people who had gone through my programs or read my book. I have a book called Fast to Heal. That's how everything basically started. And from there, it just grew. Like I started doing some hot topics. I started doing some Q&A because people were writing in with a lot of questions. And now I bring on all kinds of guest experts as well. And we mainly talk about insulin resistance, but we also talk about factors that are coming into play with the insulin resistance. Like next week, I have a toxin expert that's on. We talk about all the testing. We talk about success stories because people need to hear those. And then, kind of everything in between. So yeah, you can find that on any podcast platform that you like to listen to. It's Fast to Heal Stories.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
We have such great turnout today, and I think a lot of people commented. The latest one came in, I cured stage 4 cirrhosis from fasting and vegetarianism,
Yeah.
veganism. And then other people are also saying this is everything you said is like right on. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. It was great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining, and then be sure to follow Shana and also sign up for the courses. I mean, these courses are sounded so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.